Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, August 19th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Ohio and the $28 million pump into this Senate race that the Republican Party is scrambling last minute to spend money on this race that was otherwise deemed as safe by many political pundits and many of those inside the Republican Party. Now, this $28 million ad buy comes as a surprise, largely because the state of Ohio has never been viewed as a competitive state in this election cycle up until recently. This is a state that Donald Trump won in both of his elections by 8 percentage points against Hillary Clinton, against Joe Biden, despite Barack Obama winning the state twice in 2008 and 2012. When Donald Trump was able to win here in 2016, it indicated that Democrats were going to struggle in 2018. And struggle they did. Democrats only won 4 out of the 16 congressional seats in the state of Ohio, largely due to gerrymandering, but then in the Senate race, they won with an incumbent against a practically non-existent Republican by just 6 points, and in the governor's race, they lost despite polling ahead. Then in 2020, Ohio didn't change its trajectory, in fact stayed the exact margin for Donald Trump, one of the states that shifted the least in the 2020 election, overwhelmingly voting for President Trump's re-election bid. But fast forward to 2022, all of a sudden, the Senate race is surprisingly competitive. Not to a point where Democrats are in a position of outright victory or likely to win, but in a position where it's plausible. Back in 2016, back in 2018, back in 2020, just taking a look at that eventual environment, Democrats realistically might have only had a shot in 2018, but beyond that, they wouldn't have. This exact Senate seat was actually up back in 2016, and they lost by 21 points. So to see it now in a position where the Democrat has about a 1 in 5 chance at victory in a state where if this was a really good year for the GOP, it probably should be somewhere around maybe 1 in 20 rather than 1 in 5. You know, this 20% chance tells me that the Democratic Party is doing much better than really expected within this state. And when you actually go down to the classic model on FiveThirtyEight, that percentage chance of victory jumps up to 38, and the light model actually flips the seat in favor of the Democrats. I am one person who believes that this deluxe model is entirely accurate. I have had the state of Ohio as a likely red state for a very long and consistent period of time on my channel. Never once did I entertain the idea that Democrats might win here. But what I did entertain more recently now is that this race is becoming more competitive. Not to a point where I again think the Democratic Party is going to win, but the fact that they might win wouldn't be as shocking as otherwise maybe 2-3 months ago. And the Republicans are realizing that. This $28 million ad buy is nothing to scoff about. We've heard about $100 million cases in Georgia or in North Carolina or in South Carolina or in some of these other states that were competitive. But for a state as partisan as Ohio, as a state where you have an environment about 5 points better than 2020 where Trump won by 8, you should see a default option here for the GOP to win by 13, 14 points. But that's not what's happening. In fact, it's narrowing up relative to 2020, and the GOP is terrified. Because to reiterate again, this is not a state that should have ever been competitive at any point in time during this race. And the Republicans actually lucked out with who they nominated. There was a worse Republican, might I add. So to throw that into the mix, you would find that the state of Ohio could have actually been even more competitive than it is today, and the GOP likely could have been allocating even more funding than $28 million. To give you a better understanding as to why $28 million in specific was also funneled into the race, obviously it had to do with fear. But there is one thing that this Republican candidate, J.D. Vance, simply cannot do, and that is fundraise. Looking at the open secrets here, where they pretty much track and follow the money in politics, that's their slogan, and they do so very effectively. They have found that as of the most recent report in June of 2022, about second quarter 2022, Tim Ryan has raised $21 million in this state. The Republican J.D. Vance has only raised $3.6 million. That's a super significant reduction. That is a super significant deficit for the GOP between the Democrats and Republicans, with the Democrats being in the advantage. At a different point in time, I would be criticizing the Democratic Party for raising so much money, because this race, realistically speaking, isn't winnable. But maybe that's not so true at this point. But with $28 million surging into the race, it will immediately put J.D. Vance at least ahead of where Tim Ryan was in the last report. Chances are he's raised more money since then, but I will say that adding $28 million practically out of nowhere catches you up pretty quickly when you're at 21-3 or 21-4 at best for the GOP. You know, if we were rounding up, it'd be 22-4, right? A very significant deficit that is being made up by national Republicans. But the catch is that this being made up part by the national Republicans means that funding is being taken away from elsewhere. There are many races that the GOP could be spending this $28 million. If you think about it and, you look at some of these states and you find that they're extremely competitive, for instance, let's take a look at Nevada, where Catherine Cortez Masto is expected to win by less than 2 points, or the state of Wisconsin, where the Republican is only ahead now by less than 2 points, has about a 60% chance of victory and not 90. Looking at Arizona, Republicans are about 4 points away from unseating a Democratic incumbent in Georgia, less than a point away. I mean, these are states that could so desperately need the funding more than maybe Ohio, which is predicted to go to the GOP by a margin of about 7 points, but it isn't. Because that money is going to Ohio, people are more confident that the GOP will now win, but it was the fear that led them to funnel money into the race, and it's a fear that honestly might be very valid, knowing how the GOP is spending money. Because if this state was actually a lockdown, I'm treating it as such because that's how I've expected it to do, but there is something about reading the tea leaves. These parties rarely spend their own money on races they know they cannot win. Fundraising is a different beast. When Amy McGrath and Jamie Harrison raised money in Kentucky and South Carolina respectively, that was money that the Democratic Party themselves would not allocate on their own. That's why they went to mainstream resources, went to the media, went to fundraising efforts, because what they knew was that realistically, the national Democrats would never fund money into a race such as that one, at least not to the extent that they raised the money that they had. But in the state of Ohio, J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan are in a close race, and Tim Ryan is fundraising money because, again, national Democrats aren't going to spend money on this race. But national Republicans, however, need to intervene. And it comes also at a worse time because, as you might have seen in my video maybe less than a week ago, the Republican Party has cut ad buys in Nevada, Arizona, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Cutting ad buys in these states is an indicator either A, that you've locked down the state, which is certainly not the case for Nevada or Arizona, or B, that you're running out of money. And that's exactly what was happening. They were struggling with fundraising efforts. Actually, scrap Wisconsin or Ohio, Pennsylvania, throw it into the mix. One of those two. The point is that the GOP practically ran out of money on their Senate branch. So Mitch McConnell tapped into this fund to prop up J.D. Vance. But if this race was as solid as they originally thought it would be, they would never even have considered this. Something is going on, and they are revealing it with the way they are spending their money. You don't spend $28 million on a race that is already locked down. So the answer is, this race probably isn't locked down. Or they're very fearful that something is going to come out against J.D. Vance, that J.D. Vance is going to tank the campaign. People are fearful, and those people are Republicans. Democrats aren't counting on a victory in Ohio, but the GOP is. And if Democrats win the state of Ohio, it's game over. It's a blue wave. If Democrats win the Ohio Senate race, it will definitively have been enough shifting across the rest of the nation that more than likely Democrats win control of the House. More than likely Democrats win many governorships that they otherwise were going to lose. Kansas, Wisconsin, those states that the GOP is set for a pickup or potentially very likely to have a pickup that Democrats are going to lock down. Maybe some pickups, right, in some other states. Maybe North Carolina flips blue. I would say that, North Carolina could flip if Ohio flips in the Senate level. It's unrealistic as of now, but who's to say, that it's entirely impossible? Because quite frankly, it isn't. And that's why the GOP is terrified. Because there is even a fraction of a possibility versus, 2016 and 2020 when, Donald Trump and the internal Republicans practically knew they were going to win. They cut ad buys in Ohio in early October. And at the time, I was reading into it like it was a mistake because the polls had indicated that the race was going to be more competitive than it actually was. The polls were surprisingly pretty strong and accurate back in 2018, so I think maybe it's a Trump effect, maybe it's a midterm effect. I don't know what it is. The polls are sometimes right in Ohio, sometimes they're wrong. It really just depends on the pollster as well. 2012, 2008, 2010, 2014, you typically saw some pretty accurate results. So again, who knows, right, what's going on? But what I say to that is that, looking at our Senate results, looking at our Senate chances for the GOP, Ohio definitely still comes into this realm of possibility at losing, and if the GOP is seeing it, it's probably true. They would not waste this money if they didn't otherwise have to, And that's the problem. Because $28 million when you can't spend money on this important race in Pennsylvania, what does it mean? Right, you're canceling $10 to $20 million in ad buys because you can't fundraise it. Then here comes in Mitch McConnell with a different organization to fund money into other Republicans. Rick Scott right now is probably looking at it like he's powerless because the NRSC isn't the one that I would say, J.D. Vance has to thank, but rather Mitch McConnell. But just think about it for a moment, that the state of Ohio is the one receiving significant forms of funding, when Republicans are trying to pick up Nevada or Arizona or New Hampshire. In addition to that, I think we all remember, at least hopefully you do, the fact the GOP started opening ad buys, guess what? In Washington and Colorado. Now, Colorado, maybe, right? I think it could be a sleeper state. We could be shocked by the result. The GOP might come within a close margin of victory, but probably still won't win. But Washington is entirely illogical and out of the question. The GOP was looking for other avenues after it looked like they were doomed for defeat in the state of Pennsylvania, which they are not, by the way. Dr. Oz still has plenty of time to recover, but as of today, hold the election today, he loses, right? But lucky for him, the election is not today. But hold the election today in, Washington, Republicans are not only going to lose like they might in Pennsylvania, but they'll be blown out. Hold the election today in Colorado, Republicans might not only lose, but be blown out, right? And that's the problem. Ohio, if you held the election today, J.D. Vance probably would win, realistically speaking, but it might not be as solid as I think or some other pundits might think either. Because again, the GOP would not be spending all this money unless they were terrified. Because the likes of this money, the extent of $28 million is unlike what we've ever seen for a state like Ohio, at least as of right now. And we can take a look and compare it to some other races that have raised money. Let's say we take a look at the state of Georgia. Let's see what's being raised in the Senate race. $80 million thus far. Raphael Warnock has 60. Herschel Walker has 20. Georgia is a much more competitive state, and that $28 million would nearly put Herschel Walker to where Raphael Warnock is today. But they don't, because they need that money in Ohio. It isn't just there. Let's take a look at the state of Arizona, for instance, in the Senate race. Mark Kelly has raised $52 million. Blake Masters has only raised $5. Where's his $28 million? You take a look at other states. Colorado, one state that they wanted to spend ads in. Let's take a look. Let's see what Joe O'Dea has been able to raise. Well, in the Senate race, he's only been able to raise $4 million. It doesn't end just there. Let's keep looking. Let's take a look at the state of Nevada, for instance, where the Democrats and Republicans, haven't really seen much fundraising, but the Democrat here has raised $29 million. The Republicans have raised $7. $28 million could go a long way, even split 4 different ways, doubling the amount that Adam Laxalt had. The state of North Carolina, for instance, you take a look at the numbers there. $22 million raised. The Democrat raises 16. The Republican raises 6. The Republican Party is losing the money game, and quite frankly, sometimes they don't need it, but honestly speaking, they very well might. The Senate elections right now are so exceptionally competitive that every single thing matters. And if the GOP is allocating funds here, rather than dispersing it across Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Georgia. These are things the GOP can do, but they don't, and they didn't, because they are fearful about losing the state of Ohio, a state that never should have even been competitive in the first place. And it's not even as if the national environment is better for Democrats now than where it was in 2020 or 2018, or honestly, looking at the polls, 2016, but the GOP won practically every single race with the exception of one Senate race across all 3 past elections. And yet somehow Democrats are in a more favorable position in a year significantly worse than the midterm, significantly worse than the presidential election, and marginally worse than the last since 2016. Just something to think about, really adds into your perspective about what this money means. It tells us that McConnell and other Republicans think J.D. Vance could lose. And it also means that Democrats might start funding this race as well. Because if the GOP is doing it, why not join them? Why not add yourself into a competitive race? What if Tim Ryan loses by 2 points and the National Democratic Party is thinking, what if we did more? And what if that level of thinking is what is driving them to potentially funnel money into Tim Ryan's campaign? If I was advising them, I'd say, hands off. Don't funnel money into Ohio. Tim Ryan is a good candidate, but this simply is not his year, and J.D. Vance is more than likely going to edge him out anyway. But there's always a chance. There's always this long shot opportunity and possibility that Democrats do win in the state of Ohio, and if they did, it would mean so much more for our national implications than we can even predict. The state of Ohio is competitive at least this cycle, and it looks like the GOP is recognizing that. And it's making them very scared. And it means that they're going to spend a lot of money on this race, up to $28 million, in a race that was never even touched prior to. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, this video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.